So we have a huge week for the markets that we absolutely want to go ahead and touch on. But in this video in particularly, I want to go ahead and highlight Nvidia stock and Silo, as we have a lot of influential factors that could be the main driver for the directional move of Nvidia stock. And I absolutely just want to go ahead and cover it. Now, Nvidia stock has been selling off pretty much since the 11th of July. Now, what did we get back on the 11th of July? We had the CPI report, which is an inflationary gauge. And by the way, for those within the Push and Profit private group, I shared that the trend of inflation was going to be coming down months ago. But now the overall market, many market participants are realizing that, hey, look, after that CPI report, we're seeing inflation, the trend of it, come downwards. And that's good for the economy. That's good for the broader markets. But you may be asking, well, if that's good, why are we seeing Nvidia stocks sell off? Now, to answer that question, we kind of have to get a better understanding of what took place over the last year and why we're seeing this kind of selling pressure with Nvidia stock. Now, over the last year, we've seen this huge concentration in a lot of the mega cap names like the Magnificent Seven. Those are the companies like Microsoft, Nvidia, etc. And so there was a lot of capital flocking to these mega cap names, as that was the area for safety. But now that it's evident to the broader, to many market participants that the trend of inflation is slowing down, well, that is, kind of pointing to the signal that the Federal Reserve is going to be cutting interest rates. And we know that in a lower interest rate environment, we tend to see some of the smaller cap names perform better, right? It's a more favorable environment for those smaller cap names. And so we're seeing the concentration of capital that was in these, mega cap names such as Nvidia start to flow outwards. And that's why Nvidia stock has been kind of selling off. In fact, if we take a look at the QQQs, which is a NASDAQ index ETF, we're seeing, again, this kind of large selling pressure. We're actually close to correctional territory. In fact, to be considered a correction, you have to be down 10%. Well, from, the peak over here to where we're currently at, it's 8.41%. So near a correction. And you may be asking, well, why is the broader markets falling into correctional territory? And although the NASDAQ, or even if you take a look at the S&P 500, although it's a broadly diversified, these are broadly diversified indexes, you have to understand that, yes, they're diversified, but they have a huge weighting in a lot of the mega cap names, right? So there's a huge weighting in Apple, Microsoft, Google, Nvidia. And so if those names, if Nvidia is falling down, that's going to bring down the, S&P 500. That's going to bring down the NASDAQ index ETF. And so that's why we're seeing the market sell off, but we're seeing market breadth, where if we take a look, interestingly enough, this is the S&P 500. If we take a look at the S&P 500 equally weighted, which kind of gives us a picture of market breadth, we're seeing that it's actually pushing up. Now, for those that don't know, again, the S&P 500 equally weighted, which is RSP, is the same, number of companies within the S&P 500, but instead of having that huge weighting in those mega cap names, it's equally weighted across the overall index. And so we're seeing a lot of the other companies perform well, and it's actually evident with this chart right over here. We're seeing that pretty much a lot of the information technology companies, communication services, the growth sector, it's selling off, while we're starting to see more capital flow into different pockets of the market, such as real estate, financials, utilities, healthcare. So we're seeing, again, this market breadth. And when I say market breadth, again, that's just kind of saying that there's capital that's flowing away from the concentrated mega cap names like Nvidia into the broader markets. And that's simply because now, although I shared this months ago, that inflation was trending, it's going to be trending downwards. Now the market's realizing, okay, inflation's trending downwards. That means we're closer to the Federal Reserve cutting rates. In fact, if we take a look at this chart over here, we're seeing that pretty much the future markets, they're pricing in the probability that on September 18th, the Federal Reserve meeting, we're going to have the Federal Reserve cut interest rates by 25 basis points, and they're expecting that this has an 85.80% chance that they're likely to do this. And so again, we're going to that likely chance of having that lower interest rate environment come soon, and we have to understand that the market is very forward looking. Now, with all that said, I want to go ahead and touch on, well, are we going to see Nvidia stock continue to sell off, or are we going to see actually a bounce? Now, to answer that question, we have to kind of touch on a couple of data points that are coming out. And believe me, this is a huge week. There's a lot of data coming out. And so I want to start off from the macroeconomic perspective and then highlight a couple of other things. Now, this is a huge week because not only are we getting the job openings, which is kind of a insight into the labor markets, the JOLTS reports, are we seeing labor kind of weaken, which of course furthers the idea that the Federal Reserve is going to cut. But we also have the consumer confidence report, the ADP employment, so it's the private sector job numbers. But more importantly, we have the FOMC interest rate decision, and of course, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's press conference on July 31st. Now, if you go to this website over here, federalreserve.gov, you could see all the meetings. And although this meeting doesn't have an asterisk, and why do I say that's important? Because meetings with an asterisk are the meetings that have the summary of economic projections. Those are the more bigger meetings, kind of where they include the dot plot and a few other data points. It's not going to include this report. But nonetheless, this doesn't mean that the markets aren't going to pay attention to this July meeting. They're actually going to pay attention to this meeting in a more concentrated way, because we're going to want to listen to the tonality and the verbiage that comes out of Jerome Powell's mouth, because again, the markets are expecting that the Fed or the Federal Reserve, excuse me, I'm coughing, but the Federal Reserve is going to cut, and it has a high likelihood that they're going to cut on the meeting in September. So of course we want to pay attention to, well, what are they going to say in July that could give us clues into what's going to happen in September. And so that's going to be a huge driver for the markets. So it's going to be a lot of volatility. But on top of that, we have this calendar over here with a lot of earnings, right? We're in the midst of earnings season, and so that's why we're seeing volatility, right? When there's a lot of companies reporting earnings, you have a mixed bag. Some are doing well, some are doing poorly, but I highlighted some of the companies that I believe we want to be mindful of, and the ones I put a star are the ones that are going to be a driving factor for Nvidia. So we're looking at AMD, we're looking at Microsoft, we're looking at Amazon, we're looking at Google, and the reason why, and again, Meta over here, they're in the red box. I should have put a star there, but whatever, it happens. You forget, you make mistakes. But the reason why we want to pay attention to these mega cap names is because the market is kind of concerned that there's been a lot of spending on artificial intelligence that's gotten too rich relative to the near-term returns. And so in other words, the market's kind of concerned that there's a lot of investments into AI, and we don't know if it's even profitable. Now, if we do have good earnings from, think of Microsoft, AMD, Amazon, Google, etc., and Meta, well, that's great, because of course that's going to go ahead and provide the picture that, okay, the spending in AI is good, and that's still having these companies remain profitable, and that means that they're likely to continue investing in AI and artificial, well, I guess that's redundant, but in artificial intelligence. And of course, Nvidia is the main benefit, or is one of the main beneficiaries for investments in artificial intelligence. And so, yes, it's going to be a volatile week. We're going to have a lot of data coming out that's going to cause the broader markets like the S&P 500 to swing. But ultimately, if we have those large tech companies report good earnings and show that the investments in AI are good, well, that could be the driving factor for Nvidia stock to start to push upwards. And we are seeing a little bit of a bounce in the market. At this support area right over here, we briefly breached it, but then we ended up kind of closing slightly above it. And so my outlook is that if everything remains intact, that these earnings are coming in good, and that inflation is trending in the right direction, well, we may end up seeing that bounce for the broader markets. And when I say the broader markets, yes, I'm including even the highly concentrated tech names like Nvidia. And so to kind of summarize everything that I'm saying, again, Nvidia has been selling off. There's been a lot of profit taking, and you have to understand, I mean, why would you not take profits when Nvidia stock at one point in this year, I mean, we called this out within the Push and Profit Private Group as a trade idea, but at one point it was up 180%. And so, yeah, there's a profit taking saying, hey, look, we know that the Federal Reserve is likely to cut, and if they do so, well, there's other names that are going to benefit, and so there's going to be other opportunities, and you don't have to just concentrate on names like Nvidia. There's going to be finally other players that you could look for lucrative returns. Now, if you're interested in the trade ideas that I share within the Push and Profit private group, and also my daily briefings, make sure to check out the first link in the description below, because that link, I'm going to have a link to the Push and Profit private group where you get access to all that information with my daily briefings, what are my outlooks on the overall market in a more deeper fashion than I share on YouTube. But also consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so already. It really does help out. And with that said, let me know in the comment section down below, what are your thoughts on Nvidia? Recently, I made a video saying that Nvidia was going to bounce. And we are kind of seeing that trend, or that a little bit of a sign that Nvidia is bouncing. But of course, it's too early to say that we are going to bounce. We're going to want to pay attention to those earnings. But with that said, I'll see you guys on this next video right over here. Take care, guys.